What's going on, guys? Dare here with Fantasy Football Advice, coming at you with another fantasy football video. Now today's one, I'm not gonna lie, it's gonna be a great one. We are going to be breaking down the early rounds. This is gonna be broken up into two parts. You're watching part one, where we're going over rounds 1 and 2. We're going to be giving you our initial thoughts on each player. Keep in mind, I can't go too much in depth. It's more going to be an overview. If I did, this video would be about 4 hours long. We're still going to be having, just like last year, our individual rankings video for each position, quarterbacks, running backs, tight ends, everything. And if you're watching this earlier in the off season, just know our rankings will be changing throughout the offseason. There's no way that things are going to be locked in and set in stone. A player that we like right now may not be a target for us come August, and also the opposite effect. A player that we dislike now may grow on us depending on how everything pans out. With that being said, guys, I have some exciting news for you. We're going to be doing a giveaway. This is a cool giveaway, not some crappy giveaway. We're going to be giving out an autographed 8x10 Martavis Bryant photo. This thing is legit. I'm telling you, it's going to come with a certificate of authenticity. And if you've ever bought sports memorabilia before, it's just one of the coolest things to own. So we're going to get one of you guys started with that. And it's super easy to get entered into this giveaway. Literally a 2-step process. First things first, you have to be subscribed to the channel. If you're not subscribed, make sure you subscribe right now. That's step 1. Step 2, follow both Nick and I on Twitter. Step 3, that's it. Just step 1 and 2. Subscribe to the channel, follow Nick and I on Twitter. Our Twitters will be in the bio below. You're automatically entered. The first week of July, we're going to be posting the winner. We'll DM you on Twitter and we'll overnight it to your house. Wherever you are. I don't even care if you're outside the United States. If you win, I'll take on the cost. You guys will get it there. I don't know about overnight though if you're in Asia, but we'll make sure to get it to you as soon as possible. But yeah, signed Martavis 8x10 photo comes with a full COA. But that's enough about that. Let's get right into the video. So number 1 overall based on current ADP is Todd Gurley. Right off the bat, I can tell you he's just not number 1 on our board. That spot belongs to Bell, and it's likely because he's going to see some regression from the stats he produced last season. If we were to break it down to where we have Gurley on this draft board, he's probably tied with DJ, meaning he's not going to be somebody that we're necessarily targeting. We would be completely fine with DJ or Gurley, meaning if we did have a preference of a pick 3 would be just as good as pick 2. Assuming Bell doesn't fall, that would be the amazing outcome for a player in pick 2. But we're equally happy with getting any of the other 3 backs behind him, because that means you're basically going to get an earlier second round pick, and 1 pick at this stage in the second round is actually kind of important. How many times does a player get snagged right before your pick in these earlier rounds? Happens all the time. Gurley's our number 2, but the official number 2 though is Le'Veon Bell. The fact of the matter is, if he plays all 16 games, out of all these backs, he does have the best chance to be the top scorer. We are well aware that he had over 400 touches last season. He definitely comes with his fair share of injury concerns, but he's really only missed over 4 games in 1 season of his career. We cannot draft scared, and we cannot head into this season predicting injuries. Bell has been as consistent as they come, and you have to respect that and take him first. Moving on to number 3, we have Ezekiel Elliott. Now, if this were standard, I would say he is in the conversation for number 1 overall. If it's PPR, we would still like to take him after the top 3, Bell, Gurley, and DJ. Now, how he produced last season, he was still an RB1 despite missing 6 games, so he only played in 10 and was RB12 at the end of the season, which means he was pretty damn efficient in his 10 appearances. On a per game basis, he was 3rd in points per game, so he's definitely on the safer side of these RB picks. For one, he's got some of the freshest legs heading into the season. He missed 6 games and he wasn't injured during that time. And for 2, this team is just lacking offensive weapons, which really brings us to our next points, which would be some of the concerns. They're not glaring red flags, I would say, that should concern you too much, but this offense is probably going to be lacking firepower. Ezekiel Elliott cannot do it himself. And when Dak Prescott was forced to put this team on his back, he really struggled. Scoring opportunities for the Cowboys may be limited, and while Zeke will still get first crack at all red zone touches, the Cowboys may honestly not make it to the red zone as much as they have in previous seasons. Regardless, we have him 4th overall, so we still love him, but just a couple of things to throw out there. Moving on to ADP's number 4 is David Johnson. Now, much like these other 3 backs that we discussed, there's a case for David Johnson to be taken 1st overall. He's got the least amount of career carries out of all of these backs, and last season he only played in half a game, so he's going to come in with literally the freshest legs out of all of these backs, even fresher than that of Ezekiel Elliott. Some people will say, oh, it doesn't count, he was injured. Well, it was a wrist injury. It bodes well for him. His chances of bouncing back strong are going to be even higher. He was already healthy enough to return later on in the season. They just held him out anyways. And unlike Zeke, he can't be game scripted out. Would it really surprise anyone if he was second, maybe third at the worst on this team in targets? I know it wouldn't really surprise me. We all know his goal coming in is going to be 1,000 rushing and 1,000 receiving. But like I said before, when it comes to these top 4 RBs, you really can draft them in any order without getting too much flack for it. Each one of these running backs has a case for why they should be first overall, and each player's individual red flags aren't any worse than the others. So now we have Antonio Brown at number 5 overall in current ADP. Now he's AB. There's nothing I really need to say or I could tell you to change your mind or convince you to draft him. Even if I said he was first place in the last 3 seasons on a points per game basis, it would just go in one ear and out the other because you guys already know this. Take it to the bank. If he isn't top 5 at the position by the end of the season, hell is probably frozen over. Now, number 6, my least favorite pick of the first round is Alvin Kamara. And overall, just due to his draft price, we're not going to have any shares when we'll probably have 0% Alvin Kamara. Yeah, his reception totals are going to be giving him a safe floor, but you have to question the upside. Regardless of his size and ability, we already know that they don't intend on giving him 300 touches, and when projecting player production year over year, the most accurate way to do that is through volume. Efficiency for Kamara is going to play a major role. Yes, he could be amazing this year, and that's what you really have to bank on by taking him this high. There's still a chance he regresses in efficiency, and if you're relying on him to produce at the levels he did in 2017, you may be setting yourself up for some disappointment. Ingram's going to be out for 4 games. Saints have already came out and said they're not going to immediately give him 20 touches per game, and the fact is 20 touches per game is something that wouldn't surprise you from any of the other backs in this range. So basically, if you're at this draft position, more than likely the other 5 are already gone, and if we get the choice, we would take Barkley, Hopkins, or Odell over him in this draft spot. At number 7, we have Saquon Barkley. Now, this guy is an absolute monster and literally the best running back prospect that we have ever witnessed. There is not a single workout metric that he is bad at. We did an entire video on Barkley just yesterday, so there's no need to rehash anything that was already done in the video. But for overall, if you're one of those people that feels the need to grab a running back early in the first round, we genuinely couldn't fault somebody for taking him ahead of even Antonio Brown. Not saying that we would do it necessarily, but if you watch the video we posted yesterday, we make a case for it based on initial roster construction. It's pretty interesting. You guys should check it out. Okay, so we're going to take a quick break here and get into the stat of the day. And as for the answer yesterday, the winner was Austin Slater, and guys, this was by minutes, maybe even seconds. You guys all got it. It was Rashad Penny, the most elusive back. That was an easy one. I want to give you a tougher one. Now, it's probably going to be process of elimination. There aren't that many to choose from, but since we're not talking about any quarterbacks in this video, name a quarterback who is top 5 in quarterback rating, adjusted completion percentage, deep passing, and under pressure throws. He even ranked first in 2 out of those 4 categories. And surprisingly enough, he was the 25th ranked player when it comes to the amount of time that he had in the pocket. So he really played lights out with a lot less time in the pocket. Now here's another hint, and you know I like to do this. Probably a little slept on this year. I don't think that's going to help you guys out too much, but put your answer in the comment section below and we'll shout out the winner. Remember, there's going to be a prize. We're going to tally these up for the end of the season. So back to the list. At number 8, we have DeAndre Hopkins. Now, he may not have a safe week-to-week baseline of stats, not as safe as Antonio Brown at least, but he does have just as high of a ceiling. We saw what type of chemistry him and Watson had, and we think that's something that they can really build on heading into the 2018 season. Now, there is more risk than we would prefer to take from a draft pick this high, but if you're going balls to the wall, there's more than enough upside to make up for it. I've actually seen him fall to the back of the first round in recent mocks. If that does happen, then he's definitely a great candidate to pair with somebody like Gordon or Cook on the wraparound. I don't think anybody in their right mind could feel bad about starting their draft with Hopkins and a player like Gordon or Cook. As for me personally, I have Odell Beckham ranked higher on my draft board than Hopkins, but that's really a matter of personal preference. A case can be made for either player, and you know what you're going to get with both of these picks, and that's an absolute stud. Coming in at number 9 is a little bit of a head scratcher. That's Kareem Hunt. Now with Hunt, there are some legitimate concerns. This offense is completely different than it was a year ago under Alex Smith, and Spencer Ware is back. It's a very strong chance that Ware's going to come in and take some touches away from him. When Andy Reid was calling the plays, we saw a dramatic dip in the overall production and touches from Hunt. Historically, Reid normally sticks to one running back, but based off what we saw last season, we saw his tendencies to move away from the run game, and we just think that's a little bit more risk than we're willing to take or need to take at this stage in the draft. The thing you have to understand is with these first round picks, you really can't afford to miss out on these players. So if any of them busts, you're setting yourself up at a huge disadvantage. Just ask any of the DJ owners last year. It's a pass from us, but we can't say we don't understand the pick. Now, number 10 is my favorite pick. So we go with one of my most confusing picks in the first round to my favorite pick, which is Odell Beckham Jr. Massively disrespected based on his current ADP because he's still in his prime age. We've seen in 2014 the type of upside he has. He could have a historic season. I'm talking Randy Moss level potentially. Yes, Eli Manning is really bad, and that's going to ultimately be the main limiting factor. But let's be honest, Odell is really special. He can more than make up for that. And when it comes to these guys that you're going to be owning all season long, you want guys that are fun to watch. And if Odell isn't the most fun player to watch, or at least one of them, then I don't know who is. Moving on to 11, though, we have Leonard Fournette. Now, Leonard Fournette's definitely not a guy that we're very high on. In standard, it's a little bit of a different play. But in PPR, he just doesn't have the reception ceiling that we're looking for that other players in this range do. If the Jaguars were really smart, they would honestly use Yeldon and Grant a lot more. They were much more efficient and provided a more dynamic play style for this offense. Now, it's unlikely that they're smart enough to realize this, and Fournette's likely going to get a monster share of this backfield. But when you break down last season, too many of his production came on just a few plays, and that's not the type of players that we want on our fantasy team, at least not in the first round. Number 12, though, is a different case. We have Melvin Gordon. If you've been following the channel for a while, you know we've always been hypercritical on Gordon due to his inefficiencies. It's definitely been warranted, especially at times. Now, that doesn't mean that we think he is a bad pick at all, especially this season. He's going to have a decently high floor on what should be a really good offense. Now, when it comes to players that we would rather have in this range, Dalvin Cook's going to be higher on our board. If you get the choice between the two, I would definitely go Dalvin Cook. But let's be honest, if you have Melvin Gordon and you leave the first or second round with Melvin Gordon as your RB1, you're not going to feel bad, especially if you grabbed another solid player with your other pick. Obviously, he has the injury concerns. Last year was the first time he played a full season, but at the very least, he's been performing consistently at a high level, fantasy-wise, so we have to give him some credit there. So speaking of Cook, we have Dalvin Cook coming in at 13. If you can take anything from this video, just know that we absolutely love Dalvin Cook, and he's probably going to be one of our main targets going into the draft. Out of all of these questionable players, he has the most signs pointing to a situation where he's ready to explode this year. McKinnon's departure is going to leave a ton of targets for this backfield, and they're definitely not going to Latavius Murray. And on the ground as a rusher, he was really strong. You have Kirk Cousins coming in, which means this offense should be moving a lot better than it was last year. And while it did suck to have him injured, the bright side is it happened earlier in the season, leaving plenty of time for him to recover, so he should be coming back very strong. When it comes to these borderline first round, second round players, we like to have a safe floor with the opportunity to have a high ceiling, and Cook has exactly that. Next, we have number 14, Julio Jones. So we backed off Julio a bit, basically meaning we're not going to be targeting him in PPR, and that goes double for standard. The week-to-week volatility is just too high. Then the injury concerns, the age, the fact that they just drafted a wide receiver high in the draft, it just all adds up to too much risk. It all ties back to the need to have to kill it with your early picks. And Julio just isn't safe enough. If he comes out and he ends up as a top 5, top 8 wide receiver, I won't even feel bad because I knew that we took the necessary precautions and avoided drafting Julio because it was the right move. We're going from an unsafe pick in Julio Jones to number 15, a very safe pick in our opinion, Michael Thomas. And Michael Thomas is one of these players we feel people are not talking about enough this offseason. If you ask any Michael Thomas owners last year, they were very vocal with their displeasure for Thomas because of his lack of huge games. The difference between him and some of the other receivers that finished very high was that he was just hyper consistent. And that could be a benefit for you. Drafting him gives you the flexibility to draft some of those higher upside, riskier receivers later in the draft. And that's not to say that Michael Thomas doesn't have the room to improve on his production from last year. Drew Brees struggled in his ability to convert red zone attempts to touchdowns. I'm talking a big percentage gap, which was a major outlier in his career. He has a very strong chance to bounce back to the norm in 2018, and Michael Thomas is going to be the main beneficiary. Now, ranked at 15, that's super low because if we're being honest, we have him ranked at 10th overall right now. He's primed for a monster year, and there's really nothing bad that we can say about him. The next receiver on this list coming in at 16th overall is Keenan Allen, and we are definitely higher on Allen with the news of Hunter Henry missing the 2018 season. And one thing to monitor in your draft is that out of all of these receivers, I think he's going to be the most likely to fall in the draft boards. Some of the reasons that make me think that is because this is his first time ever being drafted in this area. So it always makes players, or fantasy owners I should say, a little bit hesitant to take the risk. In the first few rounds, you see a tendency of fantasy owners trying to stick to those names that they love, those names that they know are in the first round, and they tend to overvalue the name over the production. Someone like Julio Jones is always going to be taken very high just because his name's Julio Jones. Even though there's red flags, it doesn't matter. As long as his name's Julio Jones and he doesn't change it to Ocho Cinco, or should I say Uno, then they're going to be drafting him early. Keenan Allen, on the other hand, he had those fluky injuries, the types of injuries that don't necessarily tell you that he's injury prone, but the fact is he missed the season. So for those reasons, I could definitely see him falling in a draft that's really RB heavy. I could see him falling down to that next tier of wide receivers, in which case he could provide some excellent value. If he does play all 16, then I wouldn't be surprised if he actually leads the league in receptions. It's a realistic possibility. Now, after 3 straight wide receivers, we have another running back, and coming in at 17 is Christian McCaffrey out of Carolina. And there's a lot to like about McCaffrey, but if we're being completely honest, we don't love him. It's not that we don't like him as a player, we just don't feel like he has the upside to ever be a top 5 running back at the position. And it's just due to the lack of opportunities he has on the ground. He's realistically a role player. They brought in CJ Anderson. Now, when it comes to overall rankings, he's ranked at 17th. We have him at 18th. So it's not like we are super low on him whatsoever. It's just not somebody that we're looking for to target. Number 18 is another player that we're not going to be reaching on, and we're probably much lower than the general analysts in the fantasy football world, and that's Davante Adams. Adams is a serious candidate to have some TD regression. A full season of Rodgers could definitely negate it, but it's an amount of risk that you're going to be assuming, and in PPR leagues, you just don't need to even target him. Unlike Keenan Allen, where we mentioned he's probably going to be a draft day faller, I think Davante Adams is going to be a draft day riser. As we get closer to the NFL draft, we're going to hear more and more talk about Aaron Rodgers and how good he looks, and everyone's going to talk about how Jordy Nelson's gone. Who's that going to boost? It's going to boost Davante Adams. And while it wouldn't surprise us if he does reach that 10 touchdown mark, it's not something that you necessarily have to go out and seek. One thing you have to understand is we're not bashing all of these players. If Adams falls, there is a certain spot where we would take him. But with the amount of talented players on the board, sometimes the risk doesn't outweigh the reward. If you want to know exactly where we have everybody in the rankings, you can go to our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com, and we're going to update that all off season so you'll know exactly what we think on every player. If you want more analysis on it, leave it in the comments section down below and we'll try to get to your answer as fast and as best as we can. So coming in at 19, we have Devonta Freeman. And as it stands today, we're not completely sold on Freeman being in a great spot this year. It all really comes down to upside again. You hear us say that a bunch with these first and second round picks. In 2017, he was 13th in points per game while seeing a significant drop in targets. The dip in production matched up conveniently with the departure of Kyle Shanahan. We saw the entire team feel the effects of that change, so you have to ask yourself why. Why is Devonta Freeman going to bounce back? To me, my first initial reaction was to move over to coming up with another explanation. I'll blame the injuries he struggled with. That ruined his efficiency. Well, you could look at it one of two ways. He'll be back healthy this year, which should help his efficiency, but then you also have to figure that they want to keep him healthy, thus triggering more usage for Tevin Coleman. It's a very strong possibility they move closer to that 1A, 1B. And wouldn't it make sense if they used Tevin Coleman as much as possible, considering he's going to be leaving to free agency after the season, leaving their big, heavy, hefty contract, Devonta Freeman, as healthy as possible heading into the next season, or the playoffs for that matter? I think it all makes sense. Now, let's be honest, Freeman's efficiency wasn't bad. It wasn't as bad as people would think. It was just he was coming off of a good year, and mostly it came down to his touches and total touchdown opportunities. Those are the areas that he suffered in the most. But how can we expect him to just regain double-digit touchdowns again? You could say that it's reverting back to more of the norm, but that's the best argument you can make for it. He's realistically a player who has never put up 1,100 yards on the ground, and his reception totals are trending downward. There's no clear signs of increased red zone opportunities, so he's more of a player that feels great as an RB2, but not so much as an RB1. So now we have McCoy at 20 overall, and McCoy kind of falls into the same area as Freeman. He's kind of a player you wouldn't mind having as your RB2, but as an RB1, you can't really feel great. He's not too old, but he's definitely past his prime. He's had over 2,500 career touches. That's a lot for a player who already makes you concerned for an injury every time he carries the ball. And he looked to struggle with his efficiency last season as well. Now, I wouldn't think the efficiency is going to all of a sudden fall off a cliff this year. The major concern aside that is more going to be the risk of injury and also game script. One thing Tyrod Taylor was good for was reducing the turnovers and keeping games within reach due to his game manager-esque style of play. There were literally only 5 games that the Bills lost by over a touchdown. So you could say that McCoy isn't game script dependent because he's a great pass catcher, but the fact of the matter is if you owned McCoy last year, you knew in those blowout games, you did not see McCoy on the field. Or if he was on the field, he was not getting targeted. They were looking to throw the ball downfield, and McCoy was an afterthought. There were drives at a time where he didn't even get a single target or rush. In 2 of those 5 games where they were beaten by over a touchdown, he had no more than 12 total touches in the entire game. And now you have an inaccurate rookie quarterback at the helm with Kelvin Benjamin as their best receiver. There's just a ton of red flags and the ADP reflects it, but McCoy is a clear tier above the guys behind him. But if we're going to take him, we want him to fall in our lap. Next at number 21, we have AJ Green. And I kind of like the pick at this area. The only thing is, Andy Dalton is just really bad. Last season, the game scripts could not have been any better for AJ Green, yet he still saw his fewest receptions per game since his rookie season, and trust me, the targets were there. Andy Dalton was just horrible, and there's no signs that say Andy Dalton's going to get any better. Now, I know it sounds like we're talking him down, but let's be real, this is the 21st overall pick. It's excellent value. You're talking you could pair him with a player like potentially Le'Veon Bell, maybe David Johnson, Saquon Barkley. Those are great players to pair with AJ Green, and that's a realistic outcome in this range. But we got to move on to number 22, Jerick McKinnon. This one feels a little gross, but we get the ranking due to being the Carlos Hyde replacement, basically. Kyle Shanahan turned one of the worst pass catchers in the league into a 59 reception guy. And the first thing you want to wonder is what that could do to a player like McKinnon, who throughout history or throughout his NFL career has been a pass catching specialist. He's a playerprofiler.com dream. He's beast in every metric, but he of course still has that element of risk. He hasn't been all that productive throughout his career and it's actually been relatively underwhelming even when given the opportunity. We are still unsure of the type of workload that he can handle, but as we get into this later range, these are the type of question marks that are going to arise. And for those reasons, we can't fault anyone for drafting him in the late second. Now, number 23 is also a great pick and definitely a player that we're going to be targeting. That's Mike Evans. The Buccaneers are going to be a good team over the next 5 years. You heard that from us. They have a lot of young talent and seem to be heading in exactly the right direction. Jameis Winston is definitely getting better, and now it seems they put some of their energy into upgrading this backfield. Unlike in other years, there are actually some legitimate weapons on offense. Evans is going to have a better supporting cast. It's going to be difficult for these defenses to hyper-focus him as opposed to they have been in years before. Deshaun Jackson coming into his second year, he's definitely going to be more of an impact player than he was last season. I wouldn't necessarily say that's going to translate to consistent fantasy points, but it is going to help this passing game as a whole. You've already heard us mention the name a few times, and that's Chris Godwin. He's another player that you're going to continue to hear from us because we think he's excellent and he's very talented. Then you have Cameron Brate, OJ Howard. This receiving core is seriously legit, which is why we were very high on Winston in the first place. And as for Evans, with all these weapons, you have to expect a slight decrease in volume, but what you will see in return is an increase in efficiency. And as for those touchdowns that seem to be yo-yoing every year, expect those to increase as well. So to wrap it up at 24, we have Rob Gronkowski. We all know what Gronk can do. He's shown us that 17 touchdown ceiling and the ability to get 1,100 yards and double-digit touchdowns with ease, so he's worth the risk. But if you ask us, the risk is worth it in the early third round. We understand why people are targeting him here. That's the average draft position. That means people are actually drafting him here. He has the upside, much more so than Ertz and Kelsey, who are only going a round or two later. So we get the enamor with Gronk. We still would recommend avoiding tight ends early as much as possible, but if he does fall to the mid or late third round, it would be hard not to give him some serious consideration. Remember, just a couple years ago, he was a first round pick. Nothing has changed since then. Alright guys, that's going to do it for today's video. If you enjoyed it, please hit that like button, and don't forget to enter for your chance to win an autographed 8x10 photo of Martavis Bryant. If you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe. We thank you all for watching. We will catch you on the next one.